What's up, everybody? Kevin Stewart here. Today I'm just going to be on for a while watching some sit. I know it's been a while since I did a live. Like, this is going to be NotebookLM of one of my rants I made. I'm going to do the deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that takes the source material you give us, no matter how well different it might be, and we try to pull out the core insights.
Right.
Usually it means academic papers, maybe policy reports.
Yeah, usually. But today is something else entirely. We're not looking at a stack of balanced sources. We've been given excerpts from one single massive, and I mean massive, digital file. It's incredibly raw, very unfiltered.
And the title really says it all, doesn't it? Rant about everything.txt.
It almost doesn't do it justice, honestly. We're talking thousands upon thousands of words here. It's just this torrent of personal thoughts, frustrations, grievances, and some really, really extreme opinions.
It's like a time capsule of one person's very agitated state of mind, a snapshot of a singular worldview, and it's quite detailed.
Absolutely. And our job today, just to be crystal clear, is to approach this analytically. We're not here to diagnose or judge the author. Think of us as cartographers.
Mapping the rage.
Exactly. Mapping the rage, the personal context, the specific complaints laid out in this huge text. We need to understand what the source says objectively.
Okay, and before we even get into the what, we kind of have to talk about the how, the language itself.
Oh.
Because there's one phrase that just echoes throughout this entire document.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter what he's talking about. Tech, politics, fast food, you name it. If he hates it, it gets the label.
The flaming bag of shit label.
That's the one. It's the linguistic glue holding this whole rant together. It signifies just utter, complete, visceral contempt for whatever he's describing at that moment. It pops up constantly.
All right, let's start unpacking this. Section 1. The digital battleground. This seems to be where a lot of the author's Kevin Stewart's energy is focused. Modern tech, media. It's a war zone for him.
Okay, Kevin Stewart, that's me, by the way.
Yeah, and Ground Zero is definitely YouTube. He describes the platform as acting like a,
A flaming bag of shit lately.
Yeah.
Got it.
Right. And what's really striking is this sense of betrayal. He talks about this long, painful fight over getting his channel monetized. He actually got approved February 1st, 2024.
Oh, okay, so success.
For about 6 weeks. Then, boom, March 23rd, 2024, disabled again. And this apparently came after multiple failed attempts going way back to September 2022.
And by the way, I did got monetized again yesterday or the day before, so after 18 months. So that's a good thing.
So it's this cycle, right? Hope, then disappointment. That seems to fuel a lot of resentment.
Okay, so that's the money side. But it gets worse, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This copyright strike war.
Yeah, that happened earlier, spring of 2023. And it was over something very specific. Anime girl drowning videos. He says he nearly got his channel terminated because he got a second strike in May 23.
Anime girl drowning videos. Okay, that's niche.
It really is. It seems related to MMD, Miku Miku Dance. It's animation software that's big in certain fan communities. But the point is, this wasn't just some random copyright flag. He sees it as targeted.
Needs names, right?
Oh, yeah. He specifically calls out 2 channels, Reds, MMD, and Galathrania. And he doesn't just complain, he says he's getting ready to sue them for $2 million each.
$2 million each for copyright strikes on MMD videos.
That's what the document states. For damages related to those strikes. So you see the intensity here. It's not just annoyance. It's perceived as a massive financial and personal attack he intends to fight legally.
And on top of the copyright stuff, he's dealing with harassment.
Constant harassment, according to him, in the comments. People calling him a sex offender, a racist. He denies it all, obviously, but he's furious that YouTube isn't stopping it. He says the platform does jack shit about banning these users, even if they're repeat offenders.
So the platform feels broken to him on multiple levels. Content moderation, copyright, monetization.
Exactly. And that leads him to complain about the features themselves, like the big crackdown on ad blockers. He sees that purely as a corporate move.
Just forcing people to buy premium.
That's his take. He calls it freaking greedy. Says they're pushing people into that $13 a month subscription. And he notices every little glitch subscription feed bugs, closed captions that don't work right or won't stay on.
These aren't just bugs, Tim, are they?
No, they feel like part of a deliberate pattern. Like the platform itself is actively working against him, trying to frustrate him and basically exploit the users.
Okay, so that's YouTube, the creation side. Let's move to consumption. Section 1.2, the streaming wars. And Netflix seems to be enemy number one here.
Oh, definitely. It gets the full treatment. An overhyped flaming bag of shit streaming service. Very clear feelings there.
And the trigger point is wrestling.
Yep, professional wrestling. Specifically, the news that WWE, Raw, SmackDown, WrestleMania, all the big stuff, is moving exclusively to Netflix in 2025. And he sees this as a conspiracy.
That's the word he uses, a conspiracy.
Yeah.
He feels personally targeted, forced to subscribe to Netflix just to keep watching the wrestling content.
By the way, I don't disappoint content in the past, but I did bought Netflix. I'm on watching Raw, SmackDown, WrestleMania, whatever on Netflix now.
Then he already had access to.
Is it a big price difference?
Well, that's the interesting part. He was paying $14.99 for the WWE Network. Netflix is going to cost him $16.49, so it's less than $2 more.
Okay, not huge, but for him, it's the principle, right? It confirms his worldview that these giant corporations are scheming to bleed consumers dry, nickel and diming them into more subscriptions. He literally wishes the Netflix execs burn in a flaming bag of shit.
The anger is definitely disproportionate to the price difference. And it even spills over into other areas, like Logan Paul.
Yeah, it's all connected in his mind. He hates the WWE deal, which involves Logan Paul, so he criticizes Paul's wrestling using brass knuckles, apparently, and then goes after his Prime drink brand.
Let me guess the review.
Prime tastes like a flaming bag of shit. Yep.
I go kind of like Logan Paul because he's a fucking asshole at the pro scene.
Shows how one grievance just bleeds into the next. A corporate streaming decision leads straight to hating on a celebrity's hydration drink.
Okay, let's talk about 1.3, the actual tools and devices, because this is where things get really interesting, almost contradictory. He has this strong anti-smartphone stance.
Very strong. He's all about the flip phone. He points to his mother, Julie Tias, as the ideal. You know, old school is king, simplicity, reliability.
He wants a smartphone.
That's the twist. He admits it. He says he desperately wants one, but not for the social media or apps necessarily. It's purely practical.
Why?
So he can buy things online. He feels cut off from the modern economy because he can't easily make online purchases without one.
Wow. So he hates the idea of smartphones, but he craves...
I don't like smartphones because I got one right here. So that's the contradiction right there.
Is the access they provide.
Exactly. It's this deep conflict between his sort of ideological purity hating modern complexities and the practical reality of needing these tools just to participate, just to have some financial independence. It's a real bind for him.
And this tech suspicion extends to AI, right?
Yeah.
He's not a fan.
Not even remotely. He uses really strong language, calls AI cancer. He hates seeing students use it for basic stuff, like asking what's 2 + 2.
He sees it as a threat.
A huge threat to jobs, to creativity. He specifically mentions the actors' strike as proof that whole careers are genuinely at risk because of AI. It represents decay and laziness to him.
What's fascinating, though, is how personally he takes it when AI gets him wrong.
Oh, absolutely. He gets furious when chatbots or Google or this NotebookLM tool misreport basic facts about him, like his age. He insists he's 25 in 2025, but they keep saying he's 24.
Or his YouTube channel name.
Yeah, mixing up his main channel, Kevin Stewart, with his brand channel, John Marston. It's like he expects these massive impersonal AI systems to have perfect encyclopedic knowledge of him personally.
And when they fail, it's not just an error.
It feels like a deliberate lie, a personal insult from the machine. It reinforces his idea that these systems are fundamentally flawed and untrustworthy, even malicious.
And this tech rage extends to gaming, too.
Yeah.
Rockstar Games.
Yep. Rockstar gets singled out for pure corporate greed, all the microtransactions, but especially Grand Theft Auto V. The fact that they keep re-releasing it across, 3 console generations now?
He calls the latest version
Shit and more shit. That's his label for the expanded and enhanced edition. Just pure contempt for the business model.
I got my GTA 5. I've been playing it for years and years, but I'm just waiting for GTA 6 to come out. I bet everyone is.
And there's something about War Thunder, too, a tank.
The Mao's tank. Yes. It's a specific, detailed grievance. Apparently, it's this highly sought-after German tank in the game War Thunder, but they removed it.
Removed it entirely.
Well, they only bring it back for short periods, like during anniversary events, which means if you want it, you have to grind like crazy during that limited window.
Ah, so it creates pressure.
Exactly. He sees it as the company intentionally creating stress and anxiety just to drive player engagement and maybe spending. It fits his pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Big corporations manipulating users for profit.
Okay, let's shift from the digital world to his physical world. Section 2, the geography of anger. This is all about his frustrations with his immediate surroundings and the Greater Toronto Area, the GTA.
Right. And if the digital world felt hostile, the physical world, especially Toronto, seems like an active antagonist in his narrative. Infrastructure is definitely public enemy number one.
Traffic, I assume.
Oh, the traffic. He rages about GTA drivers, especially during rush hour, and the construction just endless everywhere. He says, "Good Lord, you can't pay me enough to drive in downtown Toronto in the rush hour." The conviction is...
I know I can't drive, I don't have a license, but I got a very fond of car roadways. Like, if you piss me off, you got this.
palpable.
Now, this is where his analysis gets problematic, isn't it? He talks about why the driving is bad.
Yes. This is important to report accurately because it's a significant part of his stated worldview in the document. His complaints about dangerous driving, people not understanding road signs. He attributes it directly to ethnicity and language.
He claims drivers don't speak English.
He claims most drivers in the GTA don't even speak English as a first language, and that's why they can't follow the rules. He uses a really derogatory phrase, retarded RS, to describe the situation.
So it's a clear shift into xenophobia.
Retarded OS. That's my version of Toys R Us, basically.
There, blaming perceived chaos on immigrants or non-English speakers.
It's a stark example of how he externalizes problems and attaches them to specific groups. It's crucial we note this is his stated reasoning in the text.
And public transit doesn't fare much better, the TTC.
The Toronto Transit Commission is described as a landmine of flaming bags of shit. So no, not much better.
Any specific complaints?
Line 1 subway closures are a major trigger. They force him onto crowded shuttle buses, and he talks about experiencing intense claustrophobic rage. He actually worries he might unleash this rage on other passengers, the lack of control, the forced proximity. It's a huge anxiety source.
Even the ferries aren't safe.
The Toronto ferries get a mention. He details how old the fleet is the newest ship from 1963, most from the 1930s. He even points out one is older than the Titanic.
Seriously, older than Titanic.
That's his claim. And he mentions past incidents where these old ferries apparently crashed into the piers. He calls them death traps.
So it's another example of decaying, unreliable infrastructure failing him. Just like YouTube, just like the TTC.
Exactly. It reinforces this theme that the systems meant to serve the public are old, broken, dangerous, and fundamentally untrustworthy.
This distrust seems to seep into everyday life too, like shopping. Section 2.2, Consumer Issues.
Yeah, and we get these incredibly detailed accounts of retail problems. It really highlights the demand for absolute perfection from systems, even at the micro level.
Like the Freshco incidents.
Right. 2 separate times in February 2025 at this specific Freshco on Steeles West and Bathurst. Both times involved issues with the sale price or the scene loyalty points for Powerade.
Most people might just let that go or get a quick fix.
Not him. According to the document, both times required lengthy, stressful arguments with the manager or the boss to get the advertised price or points honored correctly.
It sounds exhausting.
It does, but it shows this core trait. If a system, even a checkout scanner, makes a mistake, it's perceived as a major failure of integrity. And he feels compelled to invest significant emotional energy to force it back into compliance. He needs the bureaucracy to be perfect.
And then there's Tim Hortons. A Canadian icon takes a beating here.
A severe beating. He literally expresses a desire for the entire chain to die. He says he plans to dance on the grave of Tim Hortons.
Wow, why such intense hatred for Tim's?
It's partly the food. He singles out the soup and chili, suggesting they belong in a wold, But it's also the app offers. He complains they're always pushing the flatbread pizza when he just wants discounts on coffee or donuts.
So it's another institution failing him, betraying its core promise.
That seems to be the feeling. Tim Hortons is supposed to be reliable, simple Canadian comfort. Instead, it's disappointing food and irrelevant marketing, according to him. Another broken system.
And we're back to that tech contradiction again. He wants a smartphone to buy things online.
But he despises how other people use online services.
Yes.
He criticizes people using Uber Eats to get Burger King when the restaurant is right next door.
Or buying clothes online.
Yeah, buying clothes online that don't fit. Or ordering IKEA furniture for delivery when, in his view, they should just go pick it up themselves if they have a truck. He sees it all as laziness.
Which is interesting, given his own employment situation that's mentioned later.
Very interesting. It's a critique of convenience culture, even as he seems to crave the convenience that certain technologies could offer him.
Okay, finally in this section, 2.3, local politics. This is where the anger gets really focused on individuals.
Absolutely. The top targets are Ontario Premier Doug Ford and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He expresses a stated desire to yell death to both of them.
Again, reporting this is stated in the source. This is projecting that feeling of powerlessness onto the highest levels of government.
Precisely. With Doug Ford, the grievances are tied to specific policies. He hates the plan to allow liquor sales in grocery stores. His reasoning: Ontario doesn't need any more drunks.
Any other Ford policies mentioned?
The controversial mining law gets criticized, and the text even makes a point of mentioning the irony of Ford himself being a victim of an attempted carjacking in June 2025, given Ford's public stance against such crimes.
Does he agree with Ford on anything?
Actually, yes. He supports Ford's idea about moving bike lanes onto secondary streets away from main roads. So there's a glimmer of practical agreement there.
But then there's Cafedo.
Ah, yes. The Cafedo program, those temporary outdoor patios, especially along Danforth Avenue, he calls them a flaming bag of shit logistical nightmare, particularly during the Taste of the Danforth Festival.
So even if a policy has some support, if it creates inconvenience or visual clutter for him,
it's deemed a failure. Another example of government making things worse, less efficient, more frustrating.
All right, let's move into section 3. This is really important for context, the personal details. Who is Kevin Stewart, the author of this document? What's his life like?
This section helps ground all that rage we've been rapping. So the basics. Kevin Stewart, he identifies as 25 years old in 2025. Canadian-born, white, European heritage. His mother, Julie Tyus, born in England. His father, Johnny Stewart, from Nova Scotia with Scottish roots.
And his health. That seems like a major factor. 3 points.
A huge factor. He talks about significant issues with his weight. As of July 2025, he reported being 267.4 pounds. He mentions a past period where he dropped below 210 pounds after mouth surgery, but then gained it all back up into the 260s.
Does he mention his diet?
Yes, and it sounds challenging. Fast food almost every other day, a significant sweet tooth. There's a really alarming anecdote in the text.
The Mandarin incident.
Yeah. He describes going to the Mandarin buffet, eating 10 plates of food, and then vomiting it all up in the lobby afterwards.
Wow. That suggests some serious issues around food and control.
It really does. Beyond weight, he mentions just generally poor health, having had eye surgery in the past, and needing a chiropractor. It paints a picture of considerable physical discomfort, and maybe a sense of his own body failing him.
Where does he live? There was some confusion noted in the outline. Point 2.
Right. He makes a point of clarifying this. He lives at the William Lyon Mackenzie Housing Cooperative in Thornhill, but Thornhill is actually in Vaughan. He seems annoyed that AI systems get this wrong, claiming he moved from Vaughan to Thornhill.
Another example of the digital world misrepresenting his reality.
Exactly. Even his address becomes a point of contention with technology. It matters to him that the details are correct.
What about his work and financial situation?
This is key context. He works at Sobeys, the grocery store, but only one day a week, for just 3 hours. He makes $16 an hour.
That's not a lot.
Not at all. Which explains why he relies heavily on government support. Specifically, the document mentions ODSP.
ODSP.
The Ontario Disability Support Program. That's a critical piece of information for understanding his financial situation and dependence.
And this dependence seems to be a major source of conflict, especially with his mother.
Huge conflict, particularly around driving. He wants to get his license, wants that independence, but his mother, Julie Tyus, apparently prevents it.
Why?
She cites his autism, claiming it makes him unfit to drive. But the document itself pushes back on this. It includes a statistic: 1 in 3 autistic individuals without intellectual disability get licensed by age 21.
So he feels she's using autism as an excuse to keep him dependent.
Yeah.
Despite evidence it's possible.
That seems to be the implication in the text. He sees it as an arbitrary restriction blocking his path to autonomy.
And the tech conflict with parents comes up again here too.
Yes. His mother sticks to her flip phone. Old school is king. But his father apparently has a smartphone with a massive data plan, like 175 gigabit.
So he sees his father using this powerful tech, while he's stuck without it, partly because of his mother's philosophy.
It seems to reinforce that feeling of being unfairly restricted or left behind. Technology is either being withheld or misused around him, keeping him from the independence he craves.
Even his housing co-op adds to the frustration. The fence.
Yeah, it's a small detail, but telling. He complains the management at the co-op never properly fixes the property line fence. They just keep patching it up.
Just like everything else, it's not done right.
Exactly. It reinforces his worldview that nothing from global platforms down to his own backyard fence is managed properly or built to last. It fuels that intense perfectionism and frustration with mediocrity.
All of this has to impact his mental health, right? Section 3.3.
Profoundly. He says it directly. He mentions wanting to scale back his online content creation specifically because, in his words, my mental health is a flaming bag of shit.
Does he talk about seeking help?
Like, my mental health is still a flaming bag of shit right now. Like, I got some dark thoughts that will make Hitler plus. I don't know if this will talk into that, but I'm just warning you, it's pretty dark shit, man.
He does, but mostly about the frustrations with the system. He specifically names CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. He complains about them canceling appointments.
Why does he think they canceled?
He speculates it's because they saw him as not fucked up enough for their liking. Whether that's true or not, it reflects his deep feeling of being dismissed and underserved by the mental health system. He feels the system, especially for autistic individuals, just doesn't care.
And underlying all this frustration, there's loneliness.
A powerful sense of loneliness.
Yeah.
The document contains a really stark admission. I don't have any friends, and my mother doesn't give me a flaming bag of shit if I want to fucking hug or not.
That's incredibly raw.
And sad.
It really is. It cuts through the rage and shows the vulnerability underneath. This profound isolation seems central to his experience.
How does this loneliness manifest? There are fantasies mentioned.
Yes, and this is where things get very complex and, frankly, disturbing. There's a duality here. On one hand, he fantasizes about finding connection.
The rare Japanese gem. Right. He imagines meeting and marrying a beautiful Japanese woman, this rare Japanese gem who will hold him tenderly, letting him roar out my anger into her chest. It's a fantasy of complete acceptance, intimacy, and emotional release.
But then it shifts.
Drastically and darkly. This is perhaps the most troubling part of the entire document. Almost immediately after expressing this desire for tenderness, the narrative plunges into extremely graphic, violent fantasies.
Involving
Drowning sexual violence and rape, often directed towards women and children, sometimes specifically young Japanese girls.
So it's this shocking contrast. A deep yearning for connection right alongside these incredibly violent, disturbing thoughts.
Exactly. It suggests a profound internal conflict or break. The desire for love and acceptance seems inseparable from fantasies of extreme control, violence, and degradation. It's deeply unsettling.
Okay, this brings us to Section 4, Extreme Worldview and Global Grievances. And we really need to reiterate here, the content in this section is highly disturbing. We are reporting impartially on what is written in the source material provided to us. We do not endorse these views in any way.
Absolutely. This is purely about documenting the contents of this artifact. And the political extremism detailed in 4.1 is very direct and alarming.
There are explicit threats of violence.
Yes, against major political leaders in both Canada and the US. Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau. The text includes phrases like wanting to yell death to them or fantasies about, for instance, making Trump gator bait in Florida.
And then there's the admiration for Adolf Hitler.
Yes. This is stated very clearly in the document. He expresses admiration for Hitler, and it's coupled with explicit Holocaust denial.
He denies it happened.
The text states there is no proof that it ever happened in the first place. And it goes further. The author states a desire to be a modern-day Adolf Hitler, specifically to cleanse Jews from this world.
He uses that language.
Yeah.
Cleanse.
I know I won't sit like that, like denying the Holocaust and cleansing Jews, but I don't really want to do that, but my mind is fucked up, so...
That specific word. He also makes sweeping, hateful generalizations, calling Jewish people disrespectful and inconsiderate flaming bags of shit, and mentions wanting to go to a synagogue to yell death to Jews.
This is extremely serious hate speech detailed in the source.
Extremely. And his political ambitions, outlined in the fantasies, are equally extreme. He imagines becoming a dictator in Canada.
What does dictatorship look like?
Total control. He'd ban the internet, ban smartphones, ban foreign entertainment. He specifically calls out Japanese anime again, and any opposition. Executed. Publicly. Their heads displayed as a warning.
It's the ultimate fantasy of control, isn't it? The complete opposite of the powerlessness he seems to feel in his own life.
Precisely. It's taking that internal feeling of chaos and lack of agency and flipping it into a fantasy of absolute violent domination over everything and everyone.
This intensity carries over into his views on specific geopolitical and historical events. 4.2, like Fukushima.
Yes, he brings the same level of focused rage to international incidents. He strongly critiques Japan's decision back in August 2023 to release treated radioactive water from the Fukushima Daiichi plant into the Pacific.
Does he give reasons?
Oh yes, he's informed. He notes the disaster's high severity rating level 7, the maximum. He points out the huge risk to Japan's commercial fishing industry, citing it as a $14 billion sector.
He even draws historical parallels.
He does. He compares it explicitly to the Minamata disaster, where industrial mercury poisoning caused widespread, devastating health problems. So, his anger isn't just random. He's using historical context and economic data to frame it as another massive institutional failure with potentially catastrophic consequences.
What about his views on Israel and Palestine? The outline mentions a shift.
Highly volatile views here. According to the text, he initially supported Israel after the Hamas attacks, but that support quickly flipped into intense anti-Israel sentiment.
How intense?
Calling for the country to burn in a flaming bag of shit, repeating extreme claims, likely from online sources, about Israel killing, kidnapping, and raping Palestinian women and children, and again invoking Hitler, saying he should run Israel.
So his views seem very susceptible to inflammatory online rhetoric, capable of swinging wildly.
That's certainly how it appears in the document. The shifts are rapid and embrace extreme positions based on the narrative he seems to be consuming at that moment.
Amidst all this rage, digital, local, global, a whole line. Is there anything he seems to connect with positively? The outline mentions naval history.
Yes. This is a fascinating contrast. While he rages against the modern world, he shows this deep, almost tender connection to maritime history, particularly ocean liners.
Like the Titanic.
He loves the Titanic. But even more poignant is his feeling about its sister ship, the RMS Olympic, which was scrapped. He expresses genuine sorrow over that. He writes about wishing he could have bought the Olympic himself, saved it, turned it into a museum.
A desire to preserve something grand from the past.
Exactly. It contrasts so sharply with his desire to destroy parts of the present. This grief is also directed at the SS United States. He's enraged by plans to sink it to create an artificial reef.
He calls that
a crime against humanity.
Yeah.
To him, destroying this historic liner is an unforgivable act. These ships seem to represent a lost integrity, a strength and grandeur that he feels the modern flaming bag of shit world is actively dismantling. It's where his vulnerability really shows.
Okay, let's wrap up section 4 with his societal and safety complaints back in the GTA. 4.3, guns seem to be a concern.
Yes, he perceives the GTA as fundamentally dangerous. He cites specific crime stats, like the shootings over Labor Day weekend, 13 incidents, 3 fatal, and he worries about how easy it seems to get guns.
He uses a Simpsons reference.
He does. He references Homer Simpson being able to buy a gun easily, despite Homer being, in the author's words, a bad drunk with a criminal record. It's his way of saying the system for gun control is laughably ineffective.
And Canadian healthcare comes under fire, too.
Through a very specific tragic case. He discusses the death of a 36-year-old woman from liver failure. She was denied a life-saving transplant because she had a history of alcohol use.
And he disagrees with that decision.
Strongly. He condemns the review process. He argues she deserved that second chance, regardless of her past. It ties back to his core belief that systems, healthcare, justice, whatever, are often punitive and fail to offer help or redemption when needed. It's another perceived institutional betrayal.
And we end up back on the roads, driving issues again.
Always back to the roads. He recounts a specific confrontation where another driver was swearing and throwing things at him after some kind of traffic incident. It reinforces his view of drivers as aggressive and dangerous.
And his stance on bikes and scooters.
Intensely negative. He complains about near misses, about riders being underage, under 16 on scooters, and this leads to some of his most violent rhetoric.
The fantasy about cyclists.
Yes. He fantasizes about deliberately hitting cyclists with his pickup truck. He uses graphic language, ramming the flaming bag of shit jabroni cyclists down just to hear their skull cracking under the tire.
It's the ultimate expression of that claustrophobic rage he feels on the buses and roads.
It seems to be. It's taking that feeling of being encroached upon, slowed down, endangered by others in shared spaces, and projecting it outward into this incredibly violent fantasy of reclaiming control by force. The external world is the enemy, and it must be physically subdued.
So after mapping all of this, this rant about everything, what do we actually have? It's quite an artifact. It's terrifying in places, unique certainly.
It really is, and you see this strange mix, don't you? On one side, there's clearly immense personal pain being documented. The loneliness is palpable. The health issues sound genuinely difficult. That constant frustration with wanting independence, feeling dismissed by systems like CAM. Parts of that are relatable, human struggles.
But it's all expressed through this incredibly aggressive, often hateful filter. And it's put out into the world using the very technology he seems to despise.
That's the core paradox. If you had to find one thread running through everything, the YouTube battles, the traffic fury, the political threats, the personal health crises, the loneliness...
It feels like a total lack of control, overwhelming powerlessness.
Exactly. He feels utterly failed. By tech platforms that won't pay him or protect him. By politicians he can't influence. By AI that gets basic facts about him wrong. By the city's infrastructure. By the healthcare system, even arguably by his own body and his family dynamics.
So the rage, the constant flaming bag of shit label, it's all just the outward symptom of that internal feeling, that inability to achieve the self-sufficiency, the success, the connection he seems to crave.
I think that's a fair reading. The document isn't really about everything. It's about how everything seems to conspire to fail him, specifically in his quest for a functional, independent life.
And those contradictions just keep amplifying the tension, like his mother using his autism diagnosis to stop him driving.
Which blocks his physical independence. And how does he process that frustration? By fantasizing about becoming an all-powerful dictator who controls everything, bans the internet, executes dissenters. It's the ultimate compensatory fantasy.
And the biggest contradiction of all seems to be the technology itself. He hates the idea of the world going all online. He worries about digital tickets, the death of physical stores. He echoes his mother's old school is king line.
But what does he actually need to escape his current situation? To get financial independence, to build a career, maybe even just to order things he wants?
He needs the tech to work.
Yeah.
He needs a smartphone. He needs YouTube monetization. He needs the digital infrastructure he spends so much time raging against.
He's completely trapped, isn't he? He recognizes, on some level, that the only way out of his dependence on ODSP, on his mother, is to fully embrace and master the very systems he identifies as the enemy. The flaming bag of shit world he hates holds the keys to the freedom he desperately wants.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. What happens inside someone when their entire identity is built around resisting the modern world, resisting technology, seeing it as the source of their problems?
But
But then they realize that same technology is the only path forward, the only tool they have for survival, for independence, for maybe even finding that connection they lack.
How do you reconcile that? How do you square that circle, hating the tools you absolutely need? That seems to be the central, agonizing conflict at the heart of this entire document.
okay, that was the deep dive.
Welcome.
I'm going to do the same one, but a chink.
Welcome back. Today we're diving into rantabouteverything.txt. It's a very long, very unfiltered document. Massive range, personal stuff, politics, media takes, all delivered with real intensity and quite a bit of profanity.
Right.
Hey,
And
how
look,
are
that
you,
intensity
man?
is clear from page 1. But I think the first thing we need to tackle straight
I
away
can't
is
pronounce
structure.
your name.
Because the sheer volume here really needs some kind of framework if you want readers to stick with it.
Yeah, that jumped out immediately. It feels like the core challenge is, how do you navigate this? It's such a dense stream of consciousness flow, and it's hard to process.
It really is. So the main task, I think, is organizing all that raw material into maybe thematic blocks that people can actually digest. Because the weakness right now is just chaos, isn't it? It's like narrative whiplash. 1 minute you're reading this deep dive into like Hulk Hogan, TNA, WWE wrestling deals.
Super specific stuff, yeah.
Exactly. And then bam, the next sentence is about Nick Hogan crushing his car. And then like immediately after that, it's just pure holiday hatred, focusing on Christmas.
Right, and that constant shifting, it kind of prevents any single point from landing with its full weight, you know? You get these bursts of anger, but before you can really absorb why, the topic just evaporates. It's genuinely tiring to read.
It causes cognitive fatigue, absolutely. You lose all the impact. So the suggestion is pretty straightforward, really. Implement a clearer organizational structure. We need to group related rants together.
Okay, so keep the energy, but channel it?
Precisely. Group things into distinct sections. That way you control the pacing. Let arguments build on each other instead of canceling each other out.
Right, so the energy builds within a topic instead of just scattering. So for instance, rather than the current mix, you could maybe pull out, like all the local stuff together?
Exactly. Think about creating major themed categories. Maybe one section called, local Toronto GTA frustrations.
Okay.
And you put everything local in there. The complaints about drivers, the endless construction, TTC issues, the co-op housing problems you mentioned. Bundle it all. Let that section be a focused blast about the city.
Makes sense. And then maybe another for all the media stuff, because there's a lot of that too.
Perfect. A whole block from media and pop culture critiques. That's where the Netflix WWE deal analysis goes, the K-pop, J-pop commentary, the detailed breakdown of why the Big Bang Theory gets under your skin.
Yeah, group all those together. So if someone's interested in your media takes, they know where to go.
And then finally, a section for the really personal material. Personal observations and experiences, perhaps.
Uh-huh.
That's where you'd put the job complaints from Sobeys, the health and weight stuff you mentioned being 267.4 pounds, specific family dynamics, like the flip phone discussions. Give that stuff its own space too.
So it respects the different kinds of content without making the reader jump through hoops constantly.
Exactly. The big takeaway for structure is embrace the intensity, definitely, but organize it. Give the reader a map so they know what territory they're entering.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, what about the way it's written? The tone, the language itself. It's forceful, no doubt, but...
Yeah, let's talk about that. It exerts tremendous force, like you said, but I worry that force often ends up pushing the reader away rather than pulling them in.
I think I see what you mean. So, the issue is that the constant extreme profanity and some really specific derogatory terms almost build a wall, right? It undermines credibility and probably limits the audience to people who are just looking for shock value.
That's the core weakness, yeah. The sheer repetition. When phrases like flaming bag of shit or the use of retarded are applied to everything Netflix, YouTube, politicians, food, Bell Canada, specific individuals, they lose all their power.
They just become background noise.
Exactly. It's just noise. A legitimate critique, say, about Bell Canada's network reliability gets completely lost because it's just called, another goddamn trash telecommunications company or a flaming bag of shit, like everything else.
So if everything is dialed up to 11, then nothing really stands out as exceptionally bad. You lose the contrast. How do you suggest fixing that? How do you make the anger count?
We need something like let's call it a dial of intensity.
Okay.
The suggestion is really about conservation of energy. Reserve that strongest, most graphic language for the truly exceptional moments that demand it. Make it land with force because it's rare.
And for everything else?
For the others, say 95% of the time, focus on specific descriptive language to show why you're dissatisfied. Use unique details, not just generic abuse. Let the facts convey the anger.
You actually do that sometimes already. There are points where you give really specific data that's way more damning than any swear word.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the Toronto stuff. Instead of just calling the TTC, the flaming bag of shit, lean into the shocking details you've already gathered.
Like the specifics you mentioned elsewhere?
Yes. Talk about the actual problems. Focus on things like the 61-year-old Toronto ferries crashing into the dock. That paints a picture. Or detail the insane 5-year delay and the, $12.82 billion cost overrun for the Eglinton Crosstown LRT.
Right. Those specific numbers, the age of the ferry, the billions wasted, that conveys the frustration and incompetence far better than a generic insult. It has credibility.
Exactly. Those details stick with you. They prove the problem. Swap the generic abuse for specific evidence. Let the details do the heavy lifting.
Okay. Structure. Tone. Well, what's the third area?
Right, the third point. And this one's different. It moves beyond style and structure into something much more serious. It's about, practicality, credibility, and frankly, safety. We need to address this carefully.
Understood. Sounds important.
It is. The core issue is this blurring of reality and fantasy. The document mixes grounded, verifiable personal facts, things we can check, with extremely volatile, sometimes violent, and potentially illegal fantasies. And it does it abruptly without warning.
Ah, okay. I see the problem. And the weakness there is?
The weakness is twofold. First, it completely undermines the credibility of the entire document. Any valid points get lost. Second, and much more importantly, it puts the author at significant personal risk.
How so?
Because the text shifts seamlessly from stating objective facts, citing your exact age as 25, your weight at 267.4 pounds, even specific addresses like 13299 Mullen Drive.
Real identifiable details.
Exactly. And then it flips instantly into incredibly disturbing content. Things like detailed fantasies involving violence and sexual assault against children, specifically mentioning 4-year-old Japanese girls, or threats against politicians yelling death to Doug Ford, death to Justin Trudeau.
Wow, okay.
And this is especially concerning because the text itself mentions previous police involvement after an online threat related to, I think, a Taylor Swift concert.
That context changes everything. And you're right, it completely torpedoes any legitimate critique nearby, like the example you mentioned about the Fukushima water release.
Precisely. You present actual data, the severity rating, the $14 billion fishing industry impact, which is a valid environmental concern, but then it immediately pivots into those horrific fantasies about Japanese girls.
Which just destroys the credibility of the environmental point instantly.
Completely. It makes it impossible to take the preceding point seriously. So the suggestion here has to be absolute, non-negotiable really.
What is it?
You must establish an uncrossable boundary, a firewall, between content that is clearly for private emotional release, the extreme fantasies, the violent thoughts, and any material you intend for public view or as genuine commentary.
So basically, segregation of content. Private stays private.
Yes. For anything published or shared, you have to completely excise, cut out entirely, any material that constitutes threats, violent ideation, or illegal sexual fantasies. This is critical for your own safety and for anyone to take your actual arguments seriously.
Okay, so concrete examples? Like with the Fukushima point?
Right. Discuss the Japanese government's decision? Fine. Focus only on the facts, the severity rating, the fishing industry, the scientific debate. Remove completely the transition into the violent sexual fantasies. It has no place there.
And the political commentary?
Keep critiques of politicians strictly to policy, actions, or legitimate political arguments. Remove the explicit death threats against figures like Ford and Trudeau. Criticize their policies, sure, but threats cross a line legally and ethically, and they obliterate your credibility.
It protects the message, but more importantly, protects the author.
That's the crucial part. This isn't just about writing style. It's about personal safety and avoiding serious real-world consequences. This is the most vital change needed.
Okay, understood. So let's recap the 3 main takeaways here.
Sounds good. So first up, structure. To get readers engaged and keep them there, you need to organize the rants into clear thematic sections. Control the flow.
Right. Group the Toronto stuff, the media stuff, the personal stuff. Give it architecture. Second was tone and language.
Yes, the dial of intensity. Dial back the constant, extreme profanity. Make it count by using it sparingly. For the rest, use specific details and evidence to convey frustration. Let the facts speak.
Use the details like the crashing ferry or the LRT costs instead of just generic insults. Makes sense. And the third most critical point?
The absolute necessity of separating private, volatile fantasy from public commentary. Excise all threats, violent ideation, and illegal fantasies from anything shared. This is crucial for credibility and personal safety.
It really feels like the raw energy and the knowledge you clearly have on these topics are strong points. They just need channeling.
Exactly. That passion is a strength, but focus and structure will make it so much more impactful and frankly safer to express.
We genuinely believe that applying these suggestions, especially around structure and that crucial third point, will make a huge difference.
We'd be very interested to see how the material evolves with these changes.
Absolutely. Take these suggestions on board, refine the work, and please feel free to submit it again for a future critique. We'd welcome that.
Okay, that was the critique. Now we're going to do the debate.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're examining a really astonishing and frankly deeply troubling source document, rantabouteverything.txt. It's an artifact that presents just this unfiltered torrent of intense, sometimes, crippling rage, hostility, and contradictory opinions. It spans politics, technology, and some profoundly disturbing personal fantasies.
It is, without question, one of the most challenging texts we've encountered, precisely because of the sheer volume, the volatility, and, the specific malice of the hatred expressed within it.
Absolutely. And our central question today is profoundly difficult, really unavoidable when you confront this material. Does the author's extreme anger, hostility, and often antisocial perspective fundamentally stem from their stated experience of autism and feeling chronically misunderstood, even systematically failed by society?
Or should these specific, often violent viewpoints, and I think particularly the ideological hatred, be analyzed independently? As specific moral and behavioral choices, distinct from their underlying neurodivergent identity.
Right. And I'll maintain that the author's explosive reaction is a direct, albeit yes, maladaptive, product of profound loneliness and alienation. Alienation resulting from societal failures to accommodate his autism.
And I'm going to argue that while we absolutely must treat the author's very real suffering, their distress, and their struggles with systems of support seriously, the specific, hateful, ideological, and graphically violent content, while it has to be treated as independent, acquired moral positions and behavioral choices, distinct, I think, from the essential challenges of living with autism.
Okay, well, my position is rooted firmly in the author's own documentation of his life, which frames his rage as this kind of existential crisis. He explicitly states, getting autism was the worst thing I ever had. And he immediately follows that with the belief that society treats us more shitty than in the past, seeing himself as, quote, scum of the earth. This context of systematic rejection, I think, is the central engine of the text. His anger isn't abstract. It's fueled by specific, documented social failures. There's deep frustration with mental health services. He claims Cam is fucking me in the ass by canceling appointments, and clear perceived barriers to independence, like his mother refusing him a driver's license while admitting apparently autistic people could drive. This accumulation of being dismissed and constrained by the very institutions and family members meant to support him, it creates a critical mass of rage. The intense hostility we read is, yes, maladaptive, but I'd argue an understandable response to profound isolation and social rejection.
That's an interesting point, and I agree entirely on the severity of the alienation and the failure of support systems. That's undeniable. However, I would frame the outcome of that distress differently. While I fully acknowledge the documented agony, the unemployment struggles, poor health, the verifiable loneliness which you see evidenced by his dream of a woman who holds me tenderly, the specific ideological content, I think, cannot credibly be attributed solely to neurodivergence or a lack of social support. Distress may cause rage, absolutely, but it doesn't dictate the specific targets of that rage. We have to look at the specific, independently acquired malicious positions generated here.
Right.
I mean, the text contains explicit anti-Semitism. He claims to be the modern-day Adolf Hitler, calls for the cleansing of Jews. He's also an open Holocaust denier, claiming it never happened. These are specific, externally derived ideological beliefs. They aren't just generic frustrated venting. They require external exposure and, frankly, deliberate adoption.
But isn't asserting the adoption of these specific ideas sort of taking those statements out of the context of psychological decompensation? When a mind is collapsing under the weight of chronic social pain, doesn't it seek any framework, however malignant, to rationalize the chaos?
I see why you want to link the severity of the rage to the severity of the alienation, but let me offer a different perspective on that causality. While the author definitely experiences discrimination, the choice of targets for violence and hate seems specific and ideological. That indicates to me externally adopted malice, not mere projection. If this were purely projection, wouldn't we expect generalized societal hostility, not these historically specific hatreds? His hatred for K-pop is tied to specific political points about South Korean military service being, his word, retarded, not just, say, noise sensitivity, which might be linked to autism. More significantly, ideological statements like the Holocaust never happened or that Hitler was the king of pure kindness. These are highly malicious ideologies that exist independently in extremist echo chambers online and elsewhere. They are not spontaneously generated autistic frustrations. They require, I believe, a moral choice to adopt and amplify malignant content as a framework for his pain.
I'm still not convinced you've bridged that gap between the profound systemic failure he experiences and the resulting ideology. My rebuttal is that the anger is intrinsically linked to the sense of social and economic barriers he faces. The author's observation is, quote, even the people that are there to help us are treating us like scum. When the system fails him, when his employment gets cut from 4 hours to 3 hours a week at Sobeys, reinforcing this systemic sense of failure, that generalized frustration, well, it metastasizes. The hostility towards specific groups becomes a kind of catastrophic generalization, where he projects the contempt he feels society directs at him onto highly vulnerable, often ideologically convenient targets. When an individual feels utterly disempowered, they often seek frameworks that offer, total control and simplistic explanations for complex societal failures. And tragically, white supremacy and anti-Semitism often fill that void. The hatred is a warped attempt to regain power in a world that consistently disempowers him.
Okay, let's shift then to perhaps the most difficult element here, the explicit nature of the violent fantasies. Because this is where the link between neurodivergence and behavior truly fractures for me. That's a compelling argument regarding projection. But have you considered how detailed and self-aware these destructive urges actually are? The author describes wanting to ram cyclists down just to hear their skull cracking under the tire of my pickup. The specific, repeated fantasies about drowning and sexual assaults involving a minor. These are detailed, calculated expressions of transgressive evil. Crucially, the author analyzes his own creations, explicitly calling them controversial and outrageous acts. This self-awareness indicates a capacity for moral assessment and separation. He knows these are unacceptable transgressive actions. That consciousness, I think, separates these detailed ideations from involuntary emotional meltdowns or the kind of generic emotional dysregulation, sometimes common to autism. It moves from involuntary psychological distress into the realm of calculated, voluntary ideation.
I'll push back on the idea that self-awareness necessarily means the fantasies are calculated, moral choices in the way you suggest. We must always look at the underlying psychological root, which seems characterized by a state of severe psychological decompensation. And just for clarity, decompensation describes a state where the usual mature psychological defenses a person uses to cope with reality fail, leading to the breakthrough of primitive, raw, and often dangerous ideations as a kind of desperate coping mechanism against overwhelming internal pain. The author reports a severe mental health decline, stating, "My mental health is a flaming bag of shit, contemplating suicide, wanting his brain to implode." The violent fantasies, I think, are best interpreted as extreme, distorted expressions of loneliness, powerlessness, and maybe a search for an intense, albeit destructive, emotional release. When he fantasizes about drowning or hearing a skull crack, he might be experiencing an internal state of being overwhelmed, suffocated, unheard. The violence, in that distorted way, grants him a sense of efficacy and power over a world that is otherwise crushing him. He explicitly states, "I am deeply hurting in my soul and I need help." The fantasies, however terrifying they are to read, could serve a complex psychological function of venting overwhelming internal pain, not necessarily executing a calculated moral transgression.
Okay, if we accept for a moment that the core issue is decompensation and the fantasies are raw expressions of pain, where does that leave us on his constant contradictions regarding technology? Because I find these contradictions highly indicative.
Right, yes. I find these contradictions highly indicative of his struggle to navigate a world built without his neurotype in mind. His rants against technology, AI as a cancer, YouTube a flaming bag of shit, clash directly with his explicit desire for a smartphone and to, embrace the digital world. He rails against online shopping, but then wishes to buy everything online and never leave the house.
Yeah.
This highlights the struggle many neurodivergent people face in navigating the demands of fluid digital competence. He seems simultaneously drawn to the structure and potential autonomy of technology, the online shopping freedom maybe, YouTube monetization, but repelled by its inherent complexity, the sensory demands like unavoidable ads, flashing interfaces, and bureaucratic barriers like digital tickets. His black and white thinking seems to reject the unavoidable complexity of modern digital life, creating this paralyzing internal conflict.
That's a challenging point to reconcile, certainly, but I'm not convinced that specific contradiction is primarily about neurodivergence. I'd argue this dualism lamenting digital life while being utterly dependent on it is less about the neurotype and perhaps more about the generalized nature of consumerism and modern dependence. Maybe what sociologists might call digital anomie. He wants the absolute benefits, the freedom of online shopping, the monetization potential, the smartphone, without any of the perceived costs and annoyances such as digital tickets, ads, or perceived surveillance.
Okay.
This desire for absolute autonomy without friction, it points toward a general entitlement and perhaps a self-centered worldview that is highly prevalent in the digital era, really regardless of neurotype. The frustration stems from the gap between the promised frictionless technology life and the complex reality. He demands that the systems, be they YouTube or online retail, conform precisely to his isolated needs. And when they fail, the explosion is universal, yes, but the root could be generalized consumer expectation, not necessarily a unique neurodivergent struggle.
So, to summarize my perspective then, this document, though agonizing to read, is a vital document of chronic social pain and systemic failure. This individual's neurodivergence, I believe, has been magnified into explosive, hateful expressions precisely because of profound alienation, rejection, and a lack of functional support from the services supposedly designed to help him. We have to analyze the full context of autism and societal failure in understanding the root cause of the volatility, even if the resulting ideological manifestations are repellent.
It's very clear. However, I maintain that while suffering may generate the force of the rage, it doesn't fully explain the form it takes. The specific, targeted hate speech, the detailed anti-Semitism, the xenophobia,
and those calculated, transgressive, violent fantasies, these seem to be distinct, independently acquired moral and ideological positions that stand apart from his diagnosis, regardless of the level of frustration he feels.
The text certainly forces us to confront an agonizing gray area.
Indeed, it demands that we look closely at the difficult, uncomfortable distinction between profound personal suffering and moral accountability. And ultimately, it leaves the listener to weigh the influence of neurodivergent identity against the accountability for extreme, hateful, and violent rhetoric.
Okay, that was the unhinged rant of Kevin Stewart.
Oh,
Okay, this is another thing, NotebookLM thingy, or whatever you want to call it. And this is a everyman's ramblings. This is going to be the week chink. Here we go.
okay. So this week we're looking at something pretty unique.
I am going to be right back.
It's a transcript, basically recorded speech. Very fragmented. Jumps all over the place, medical stuff, money worries, little daily observations. Really unfiltered.
Got it, like a stream of consciousness captured.
Exactly. And its biggest strength is right there. It's got this raw, undeniable authenticity.
Yeah, you can feel that intensity.
Absolutely. The voice is so distinct, and the detail is incredible. Like, feeling your hand go numb from a blood pressure cuff during a stress test.
Oof.
Or getting the exact rent calculation wrong, 6,168, when the numbers are right. It's vivid, intense life, no filter.
That kind of detail is powerful, no question. But it's raw material, isn't it? It's not quite communication yet.
Right.
We need to figure out how to channel that intensity, otherwise the reader just gets lost, swept away by it all.
That's the perfect way to put it. So let's tackle that foundational issue head on. The material as it stands, it's like an archive of someone's thoughts. But because there's no clear audience or purpose defined, it's basically impenetrable for anyone else.
Okay.
So the weakness here is it just doesn't establish its why. It throws together these really high stakes, debilitating personal issues.
Like the COPD breathing problems you mentioned?
Yeah, exactly. Or navigating 08 DSP forms, getting those specific blood and piss tests done. Serious stuff.
Right.
And then, sometimes in the same paragraph, it jumps to needing a pooper scooper.
Okay.
Or arguing about whether a French fry sandwich is a good idea. It just reads like a private data dump, not something meant to be, shared or understood by others.
I totally agree. That indiscriminate mixing, it actually works against the author. Because look, for the author, maybe that French fry sandwich is important. A coping thing, whatever.
Sure, could be.
But when you put it right next to the bureaucratic nightmare of ODSP, you unintentionally kind of diminish the seriousness of that struggle.
Good point. It flattens the importance.
Yeah. So we need to ask, what does the author want the reader to feel or understand? Empathy for the daily grind? Or grasp the scale of these huge administrative and medical battles?
That's the absolute crux of it. So the suggestion here is pretty fundamental. The listener, the author, needs to decide on one single external goal for this document.
Okay, one goal.
Is it mainly a therapeutic journal, for personal processing? Is it a chronological log of grievances? Or, and this seems promising given the detail, is it meant to be a kind of reference document?
A reference? How so?
Well, to track specific bureaucratic processes, maybe, or financial discrepancies, something more functional.
Okay, I see. If they lean that way towards utility, like a reference document tracking life's admin battles,
Right.
then the focus has got to shift to method. You'd need like strict thematic sections, turning that raw emotion into usable evidence.
Exactly. And concrete examples are key here. Instead of just, scattered complaints, you could create a really rigorous financial health section.
Okay, dedicated section.
Yeah, focused only on things like those wrong rent calculations you mentioned. Or the whole saga of trying to get the $140 carbon tax rebate when you don't drive. Or the specific rules about old age security and the Ontario drug benefit plan. The income threshold, the $25,000 thing.
Right, those details are in there.
Putting all that together thematically turns this confusing flood of information into, distinct chapters, battle reports almost.
That's a...
I'm going to be right back again. I just need to put my phone in the charge zone.
Great way to frame it. Battle reports. That gives the author control and it gives the reader a clear way in. Okay, that makes sense.
So, moving on then. The second major issue we identified, this rapid-fire, almost associative structure.
Ah, yes, the jumping around.
It just buries the critical stuff. And it undermines the genuine frustrations because every detail gets treated the same. There's no weight.
Let's dig into that structural disorder. Because, yeah, there's zero information hierarchy. The shifts are just dizzying. Whiplash is a good word for it.
You get these really intense descriptions like the problems with the new computer, Wi-Fi disconnecting constantly,
Ugh, nightmare.
password verification codes being sent to a lost cell phone, trying desperately to turn off scary, disgusting notifications. You feel the frustration, right?
Absolutely. High-stakes tech drama.
And then, literally the next sentence could be about, I don't know, professional wrestling.
Right. The Undertaker's moves or the big show popping up.
It completely yanks you out of that emotional investment in the computer problem.
Instantly gone. And as a reader, you just can't tell what's actually urgent anymore. Because the narrative gives the same weight to, institutional failure, tech meltdowns, and random pop culture references. If everything's shouting, you hear nothing. The real crises get flattened by just passing thoughts.
Exactly. So the suggestion has to be about imposing some order. Implement a system of, let's call it, information chunking.
Chunking? Okay.
Grouping related topics together. And, maybe, crucially, assign some kind of severity level or an importance tag to each chunk.
Right. Distinguish the critical from the background noise.
Yeah. Isolate the core challenges from the mental static.
So to make that practical, you'd need to systematically categorize things, put them in thematic buckets.
For instance,
Well, group all the communication problems together. The complaints about mom always calling to complain.
Okay.
The confusion about doctor's appointments. The struggle to even make appointments because of institutional incompetence. The line about she doesn't have the energy to reach this partner.
right. That's a powerful line about systemic failure. Group that with other communication breakdowns.
And then maybe another bucket for, say, physical environment stuff.
Like?
Like the notes about the neighbor's ugly fence leaning this way or that way. Or that crazy temperature difference, 95 degrees upstairs, 18 in the basement.
Wow. Yeah.
and the need to check the kitchen or bathroom conditions. Put all those physical space, maintenance, comfort issues together.
Separating those topics out would absolutely clarify the scope of the problems the speaker's dealing with at any given time.
It's that structural separation that's going to lift the important stuff up, make it impactful.
Okay. So, purpose, structure. What's the third key area?
The voice. Or voices, maybe?
Ah, right.
The imperative here is to frame and contextualize who is speaking. Because right now, it jumps constantly between direct quotes, internal thoughts, recounting what someone else said.
Yeah.
And it creates this radical ambiguity. You often can't tell who the main protagonist is, or even what the immediate situation is. Is this a live conversation, a memory?
That is a major source of confusion. The text uses I, but also names like Kevin, Mom. Mm-hmm. And it often shifts mid-sentence into dialogue, but with no quotation marks, no attribution, nothing.
Yeah.
And the language itself is often highly emotional, sometimes aggressive, especially around politics, like Trudeau or Trump.
Right. Very charged language.
But it lacks a clear anchor, so you're left wondering, is the speaker recounting a fight they had yesterday? Or is this transcript capturing a real-time argument happening now with multiple people?
And without clear signposting or some kind of metadata, the reader wastes so much energy just trying to figure out who is talking.
Or even if the speaker is quoting themselves from an earlier conversation.
Exactly. Like that bit about the stress test. I said they were not professional. That's how tight he's gotta be. Human beings can't do that. It's powerful stuff.
Devastating, yeah.
But it loses some of its impact if we're not 100% sure whose perspective we're locked into right then. So the suggestion here is actually fairly simple conceptually. Just introduce clear signposting.
Like labels?
Yeah, or some kind of metadata to frame sections. Just clarify who's speaking, and maybe who they're speaking to. Or if it's internal thought.
So, if this is meant to be, say, creative self-study or maybe memoir material based on these recordings,
Right.
use clear labels to ground those intense anecdotes. Pull out those vivid segments and let them stand alone for a moment.
Yeah, isolate them. Like that bit about politics, the speaker saying they couldn't be a politician because I can't lie like they do, fearing impeachment or assassination.
Okay, treat that as a distinct piece.
Frame it. Anecdote. Thoughts on politics. Or take the frustration about social services, that feeling that institutions prioritize junkies and alcoholics over people like him.
Mm-hmm.
Isolate that rant. Frame it clearly. Commentary. Social services experience. That immediately gives clarity. The reader can then focus on the content of the emotion or idea, not get tangled up trying to figure out the context of who said what when.
It seems like this raw material is incredibly potent because of its honesty.
Absolutely potent.
But that power needs focus to actually land effectively.
Precisely. Focus is the antidote to the chaos here.
Okay, so let's recap the core actionable steps for the author. It really boils down to foundational organization first.
Define the purpose.
Yes, define the central purpose and intended audience. Move away from just being a private archive.
Second,
Impose a rigorous structure. Use that chunking idea to create hierarchy. Separate the critical, actionable stuff from the fleeting observations.
structure and hierarchy. And third,
Clarify the voice, or voices. Use signposting, labels, whatever it takes to ground the reader. Make it clear who is speaking and in what context.
yeah, purpose, structure, voice, those are the big three.
The source data itself, the raw content, is exceptionally strong. Really valuable detail in there.
Definitely. So tackle these organizational challenges. Define the purpose, build the structure, clarify the voices, and the true value of this incredibly honest, detailed material will shine through.
We definitely encourage the listener to work on these areas.
Absolutely. And please submit the revised, segmented work back to us when you're ready. We'd be very interested to see how it evolves. Good luck with the revisions.
Okay, that was the repeat. I'm just gonna use the washroom for a minute or so. I'll be right back again. Okay, I'm gonna do the debate.
Welcome to the debate. Today we are grappling with something I think we all feel, the pervasive friction that seems to define modern life. We're looking at this dense intersection of technology, health systems, and, well, government bureaucracy, all vividly brought to life by our source material. And the central question we really need to answer is critical. Does the increasing complexity, and especially the mandated digitization of these essential modern systems, does it fundamentally serve to benefit and empower the user? Or does it primarily create new and maybe often insurmountable barriers?
That is absolutely the crucial distinction, isn't it? Especially when the accounts we're looking at detail such profound, just relentless daily struggles against the very systems supposedly intended to serve the individual. It's quite stark.
Right. My position fundamentally is that this complexity, while I admit undeniably frustrating at times, it's an unavoidable element. It's part of achieving superior function, comprehensive security, and overall efficiency. These sophisticated structures, I believe, ultimately benefit the individual through, dramatically increased access to services and, frankly, a better quality of life. We are talking about necessary evolution here.
See, I come at it from a rather different angle. I'd argue that modern complexity overwhelmingly prioritizes systemic efficiency, what's convenient for the institution administratively speaking, over genuine user accessibility. And this results in these deeply frustrating, often exclusionary barriers. We see it evidenced by repeated breakdowns in mandated procedures, constant reliance on flawed digital interfaces. Complexity isn't always the same as quality or access. Sometimes, honestly, it's just obstruction.
Well, let's look closely at the adoption of new tech, like personal computing that's described in the material. The complexity there seems directly tied to, an evolutionary necessity. The user gets systems with genuinely advanced capabilities. We hear specific details like substantial RAM, high-capacity solid-state drives. This advanced infrastructure, coupled with crucial layered security features like Bitdefender mentioned, it enables superior performance and proactive protection that just wasn't available in simpler systems. And that capacity, that power, allows for the conveniences we now kind of rely on, whether it's setting up really precise, customized notifications or consolidating essential functions like, using a phone as a car key or house key. Furthermore, even in challenging areas like healthcare, Modern protocols, things like rigorous stress tests, detailed monitoring, they're implemented for comprehensive preventive care. They ensure safety, better long-term outcomes, even if, the process itself feels invasive or uncomfortable, like that blood pressure cuff being so tight even before it pumps up.
I see why you'd frame it that way, positioning those specifications as inherent benefits. But that view really neglects the immense cost, the frustration that follows. The source material is just full of instances where mandated digital and bureaucratic complexity actively creates these points of failure that effectively deny the user access to essential services, resources. The repeated reliance on digital verification isn't robustness. It's a crippling systemic vulnerability. We see a person literally trapped out of their account because the mandated verification code keeps defaulting to a lost cell phone. I mean, come on. This isn't just an inconvenience. That level of complexity is actively negating the very independence technology promises. And what's more, financial and governmental administration, it often suffers from this crippling opacity. It requires external expert review just to verify basic information, like rectifying these minor but persistent calculation errors in financial entitlements. You know, the rent being $55 more for several months, the small discrepancy between $6,168 and $6,172.55, needing someone like David Amberger to review records. The sheer burden of maintaining these opaque systems falls entirely onto the user. It requires constant...
By the way, this is NotebookLM. It's not wet about everything. As you we target speech, text, TSC, or whatever you want to call it. I secretly record my phones. So most of the, almost everything in this, whatever, is basically recorded from my parents behind their backs.
Unwelcome attention, like troubleshooting perpetual Wi-Fi issues on a brand new computer after every single reboot. It's exhausting.
That reliance on external help you mentioned, the David Amberger example, while obviously frustrating for the individual, often occurs precisely because the data exists in such detail to be audited in the first place. That detail allows for correction. But let's focus on that first point you raised, what you call the authentication trap. You highlighted the severe friction, passwords, two-factor authentication, leading to users being locked out. That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. This complexity is strictly, fundamentally for the user's protection. We are living in an era where sensitive data, financial records, tax statements, our very identity must be safeguarded against constant external threats. We read about the intense desire to protect things, even personal items in the material. The failure here isn't the system's existence, I'd argue, but maybe the user's management of those necessary security measures. If the authentication default is an old phone, well, that's arguably a management error in configuring the protocols designed specifically to protect their financial life and identity. Protection has to be prioritized over absolute convenience sometimes.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that. You're effectively shifting the blame from the system's designer to the victim of that design. If a security system is unusable or defaults to a single, unreliable point of contact like a lost phone, it is inherently flawed regardless of its protective intent. A good security system is built with robust redundancy. Why does the digital architecture repeatedly fail to provide alternative, non-dependent ways to recover during setup? Why isn't that built in from the start? When the system traps the user out, forces reliance on some protracted, often unhelpful support structure or the help of others, it actively undermines self-reliance. You simply cannot argue for technological empowerment when the prerequisite for access is mastering a poorly designed system that punishes you for a completely common life event, like losing or breaking your phone. That level of friction becomes an isolating barrier, not a protective layer. It's punitive.
But what's the credible alternative then? Seriously, if we strip away the necessary layers of security just to increase convenience, don't we open the door to catastrophic breaches? These systems are dealing with core identity, financial health. The level of complexity, even if it leads to friction, it's a reflection of the high stakes involved. It feels like we're demanding the system be both ironclad secure and immediately accessible under absolutely all circumstances. And that's almost a technical contradiction in the modern digital landscape. The onus eventually has to fall somewhat on the individual to manage their digital keys, doesn't it?
The credible alternative is intelligent design. It's not about no security, it's about better security design. Systems should mandate multiple, independent recovery methods during the initial setup, not just funnel everything through one potential point of failure tied to a single losable device. The complexity should be managed intelligently by the system, not just offloaded entirely onto the end user as their problem. If the sophisticated software includes advanced features like Bitdefender, as mentioned, why can't that same sophistication extend to designing a user-friendly, resilient recovery protocol? It demonstrates a fundamental failure in priorities. Protect the data from external threats, yes, absolutely, but ignoring the very real threat of system-inflicted self-lockout is a huge blind spot.
That brings us effectively to the second point, doesn't it? Regarding the opacity of bureaucracy and financial and health systems. You pointed out the energy drain these systems impose. I acknowledge that these systems are dense. They are complex. But I argue that the density provides necessary accountability when you're dealing with crucial social assistance programs, ODSP, OAS, pension entitlements, drug benefit plans at 65. The rigor is essential. The detailed documentation, the paper trails, they provide the mechanism to correct errors. You mentioned the financial calculation errors, small discrepancies, perhaps $55 or a few dollars on rent. But those detailed numbers meant the information existed to rectify the situation when an external expert like Amberger reviewed the records. The system, while yes, requiring navigation and patience, is fundamentally auditable. It's designed for fairness through that kind of structured scrutiny.
That assumes the user has the intellectual capital, the emotional resilience, and frankly, the sheer volume of time required to constantly audit the institution providing the service. I really challenge that assumption. I focus on the intense cognitive load, the energy drain you acknowledged, that's required just to navigate these opaque systems. They effectively turn every citizen into an unpaid part-time system administrator just to survive within them. These tasks aren't just benign administrative chores, they become long-term draining struggles. We see this so acutely in the source material's interaction with the medical system. A multi-step failed referral process. It required getting a new referral simply because the previous one was seemingly ignored or lost within the internal institutional.
I'm going to be right back because I'm tired of harboring. I'm currently looking up some beef patties right now.
Logic. That's not accountability, that's breakdown. And we also see the confusion over basic entitlements. The user is left questioning even simple benefits like the carbon tax rebate for someone who doesn't drive, because the system relies on complex, often contradictory assumptions about user behavior and eligibility. Why should a system supposedly designed for accessibility require you to hire a third-party expert, or spend weeks, maybe months, chasing down an ignored medical referral just to access the services you are legally entitled to? The accountability you praise feels completely inaccessible to the average person because of the sheer effort required to actually unlock it. It's there in theory, but not in practice for many.
But the sheer volume of data and the legislative complexity governing these major programs, whether it's managing pension claims, OAS, specialized drug benefit plans, it necessitates that level of density.
Sorry about the whatever you want to call it. The whatever. They're doing that shit in the backyard or somebody's backyard.
We can't just radically simplify a system governing millions of nuanced situations without sacrificing fairness, or worse, exposing the system to significant fraud. The energy drain you described, perhaps it's the necessary price of robust, documented systemic integrity. If the system was too easy to navigate, it would likely be easily manipulated or much more prone to error in dispensing benefits. The complexity, in a way, ensures that the rigor is applied equally across the board, even if that means the initial barrier to entry feels high.
Okay, let's shift our focus maybe to the design component now, the user experience side.
He focused on the new computer setup dilemma, that persistent, unnecessary friction, like the Wi-Fi settings needing constant re-enabling after every single restart, or the bizarre placement of the power switch on the back of the front of the unit. You suggest this prioritizes internal technical logic over the user.
Precisely. Exactly. These specific maddening examples are symptoms. Symptoms of systems prioritizing technical and engineering logic, maybe simplifying manufacturing processes, for instance, or assuming ideal, stable network environments that just don't exist in reality, over intuitive, human-centered design. It is the technical requirement dictating the human experience, often to its detriment. If a newly purchased computer constantly requires troubleshooting just to maintain basic connectivity, the supposed benefit of its superior hardware, like the fast storage and processing power you mentioned, it's fundamentally undercut by these irritating setup and maintenance demands. This transforms what should be a tool for empowerment into a constant maintenance burden. We are basically forced to become technical experts just to use a basic utility reliably.
I have to disagree that these examples invalidate the core benefit of the technology itself. I would argue that many new computer features, especially the dramatic improvements we've seen in storage, processing speed, the ability to run multiple heavy applications simultaneously, they demonstrate clear, powerful user benefits. They enable levels of productivity, creativity, entertainment that simply weren't possible before. The configuration issues you highlight, whether managing Wi-Fi stability or installing necessary layered software updates like Bitdefender, I see those more as temporary setup hurdles, or perhaps standard maintenance required for optimal function in a complex, networked environment. They are the cost of entry, if you will, into a highly powerful ecosystem. Once these initial optimization hurdles are cleared, The ultimate performance payoff, I think, justifies that early friction. The complexity is inherent in the power being delivered.
But it's easy to dismiss this as temporary setup friction when the source material details the chronic nature of these problems. Wi-Fi resetting after every single restart. That suggests a deep, ongoing technical conflict between the system's internal logic and the user's actual reality. It's not temporary if it never stops. Furthermore, poor physical design, like that badly located power button, that's a choice. It demonstrates a clear lack of consideration for human factors, for how people actually use things. Systems architects have to recognize that while technical complexity might be necessary internally, the user interface, the physical design, that should be a layer of profound simplicity, or at least thoughtful usability. When they fail to provide that simple, intuitive layer, the complexity underneath just becomes punitive. It works against the user.
But even that poor physical design choice, it's often driven by the need to maximize the superior internal components. To house the 16 gigabytes of RAM, the high-speed drive, maybe compromises in external design are deemed necessary. We are talking about trade-offs here. We're asking for immense speed and power, and that inevitably dictates certain constraints. The failure, perhaps, isn't always that the complexity exists. Maybe the failure is sometimes one of insufficient instruction or training or onboarding for the user to properly manage the immense power they've actually purchased. The system itself technically is functional and superior.
Functionality is almost useless if it's constantly requiring intervention and fiddling. If the design demands that the user become technically literate just to secure a reliable network connection after a routine reboot, the system is fundamentally broken for the average person it's supposed to serve. The whole point of the digital mandate in modern life requires ubiquitous accessibility, and perpetual maintenance barriers are the absolute opposite of that. It blocks access instead of enabling it.
I certainly acknowledge that the source material reveals intense, very specific frustration, and these individuals are clearly facing significant challenges in adapting to a world filled with pervasive technological demands. However, the complex systems we've discussed, I maintain, the essential mechanism through which modern society functions. They offer undeniable access to convenience, ordering food, entertainment, information, and crucial safeguards in security and comprehensive health monitoring. The challenge, as I see it, lies in adaptation and perhaps in better understanding the necessary rigor of these modern tools.
My summary remains that the evidence we've examined overwhelmingly points to systemic failure. Failure when complex, digital, and bureaucratic systems are imposed without adequate, thoughtful consideration for user experience and, frankly, human error. This design approach, this philosophy, turns necessary functions like getting medical help, paying bills, verifying basic financial entitlements into punitive and isolating experiences. The user is left feeling constantly monitored, yet perpetually unsupported by the very structures that are meant to protect and serve them.
Well, this discussion, I think, richly illuminates the daily friction encountered when a determined individual interfaces with the structured complexity of the 21st century. It's palpable.
And it really forces us to deeply consider where the true burden of adaptation lies. Is it solely on the individual who must somehow master every flawed, complex system they encounter? Or does more responsibility lie with the architects of these complex and, as we've seen, often failing institutions? That's a lingering question.
Okay, that was the debate. Before I go to the deep dive, I want to show you how I make my thumbnail for this nice screen. It's called Pick AI. And this is my profile. And please, YouTube, don't ban me for showing this on my screen, like, nude. Like, I'm not going to show you a lot of it because I don't want to be canned due to it. Like, I'm going to show how I make without the dude. Like this one here. This is basically the type of thumbnail I got now, but for the hell, I'm going to generate this for you guys. Here's the finished product. Like most of my fans know that I'm a big anime fan, and the person or album name go in the thumbnail is Sonic Diego from Strike Witches. And if you want to follow me on Pixar or Pix AI, here's the link to my profile. Before I go, I'm probably going to check my email to so I got a little email that, hey Noah, what's up? I don't know. I don't know how much you and us need to, but I'm glad that you're here, man. I'm going to do the deep dive, and probably after this, I might end the stream.
Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to take these, well, sometimes really dense and chaotic source materials and try to make sense of them, find the patterns, and pull out the knowledge for you, the learner.
And today's material is definitely unique. It's less a structured document and more like an excavation, really.
Right.
We've got this huge fragmented transcription. Think of it like a digital artifact capturing someone's stream of consciousness, just raw, unfiltered thoughts.
It jumps around.
Oh, absolutely. It's a wild mix. You've got deep personal stuff, complaints about bills, then suddenly rants about global politics, wrestling commentary, kitchen repairs, you name it.
Exactly. 1 minute it's about the oven needing fixing. The next it's trying to figure out rent calculations.
Yeah.
And then boom, something about international relations or, wrestling moves.
Which is why what we're doing here feels pretty important. We're essentially trying to chart a course through all this.
I'm on TikTok too, but it's been a while since I've been on that, so...
Conversational chaos, maybe?
Yeah. finding the thread.
You go from trying to understand some really weird math on a rent receipt, like how 36 plus 3,700 somehow equals over $6,000.
You'll get into that specific number. It's quite something.
Definitely. And then, you're suddenly questioning why McDonald's is giving out wooden sporks, and then you pivot again to the actual physical danger involved in a specific wrestling hold. It's quite the ride.
So the value for you listening is that we're trying to find the patterns in that noise. We're mapping this very detailed, sometimes even contradictory personal narrative.
And by doing that, we think we can show just how much mental energy, how much cognitive load it takes just to get through daily life today.
Right. These personal struggles, fighting with bills, healthcare bureaucracy, technology that just doesn't work right.
They're often reflections of bigger things, right? Systemic issues, institutional failures. We're aiming to give you a shortcut through the static to see some of those core frustrations of living right now.
Okay, so let's start unpacking it. It makes sense to begin where daily life often feels like a battle. Just managing the basics, the systems that control our money, our homes, our health.
Exactly. Let's dive into what we're calling the logistics of life. So the first big theme that just jumps out is this constant, exhausting effort needed just to make sure you're not getting ripped off, basically, especially with bills.
Yeah, the source material shows someone really committed to auditing everything, checking bills, scrutinizing records. It suggests, a pretty deep lack of trust in the systems themselves.
And you can see why, based on the examples. There's this specific and frankly maddening bit about trying to make sense of rent numbers.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So the person's looking at a rent receipt, right? And it shows amounts like $36 and $3,700. But the total payment recorded is, get this, $6,172.55.
Wait, 36 plus 3,700?
Yeah.
That's nowhere near 6,100. How?
Exactly. And the source asks very directly, where the hell did the $55 come from? It's not just a typo, it's this fundamental breakdown in clarity.
That's the kind of thing that drives you nuts.
It absolutely is,
All right.
because when the numbers don't even follow basic arithmetic, it forces the individual into becoming a detective, spending hours trying to figure it out.
And you start wondering if it's deliberately confusing.
Well, the source seems to suspect that, yeah. That maybe the system is opaque on purpose, maybe it makes it easier to hide discrepancies, especially, they note, around whether something is billed as residential versus business. That distinction seems blurry in the paperwork.
So it's not just paying rent. It's constantly verifying that the rent amount is even correct.
Precisely. And the auditing doesn't stop there. The source also calculates their own total yearly rent, arriving at $6,168.
As a cross-check.
Seems like it. If the monthly figures are confusing, maybe the annual total makes more sense. But it just highlights this need for constant financial vigilance just for basic housing costs. It's not passive, it's active defense.
And that baseline financial stress, you see it bleeding into other areas too, right? Like consumer costs.
Oh, definitely. There's this feeling of being constantly nickel and dimed. We see mentions of consumer points systems, getting 1,500 points just for buying bread.
Which suggests relying on these loyalty programs to maybe just offset rising costs.
That's the impression. Trying to claw back some value because everything else is getting so expensive. And the source gives a really stark example of that inflation.
What?
Oranges. Just basic oranges. The price apparently jumped from $3.99 to $8.99, almost overnight it sounds like.
Wow, that's more than double for oranges.
Yeah. And when you're already struggling to make sense of your rent math, a price shock like that on a basic staple, it really underscores how precarious things can feel.
Which leads naturally into the broader housing concerns, right?
Yeah.
Particularly in the Canadian context mentioned.
Exactly. There's this real frustration voiced. On one hand, the government says, we put up affordable housing. We help you find affordable housing. That's the promise.
But the reality on the ground.
The reality described is downtown areas being incredibly crowded, literally no parking for anybody, so the policy and the lived experience feel completely disconnected.
And just the cost of, anything related to maintaining a place.
It's prohibitive. And this highlights how easily just one unexpected expense can throw a tight budget completely off track. There's this specific, almost bewildered mention of needing a pooper scooper for a dog.
Okay.
And it cost $175.
$175.
Yeah.
for a pooper scooper.
I know, right? It sounds like a joke, but it's presented as real. And the person says, look, I'm not spending $175 on that when it was already hard to justify spending $100 on something else entirely.
It makes even the most basic necessities feel like luxury items.
That's exactly the feeling. Inflation hitting not just the big things, but the small essential ones too.
Okay, so we've got financial opacity, housing stress, and then there's the whole health system bureaucracy.
Yeah, if anything, the frustration seems to ramp up even more here. Just managing the logistics of healthcare, dealing with administrative failures, it sounds like a nightmare.
There's an example about overdue courses or appointments.
A really striking one. The source mentions getting a notification that some required course was overdue by 847 days.
847 days. That's, what, almost 2.5, nearly 3 years?
Pretty much. And you think that's not just a missed reminder. That sounds like a complete black hole in their record-keeping or notification system.
So the burden falls back on the patient to chase down the system's own failures.
Exactly. You're responsible for fixing their tracking errors. And this lack of clear communication pops up again with medical tests.
What kind of confusion?
Well, the source mentions needing blood and urine tests, but being totally confused by the terminology. They're trying to figure out if the test requested was PSI or PSA.
Okay, PSI, like pounds per square inch, versus PSA, prostate-specific antigen.
Right. One's an engineering term, the other's a specific medical marker. And that confusion is a perfect example of how medical jargon, if it's not explained clearly, can cause huge stress and potential errors.
Yeah, you need to know what test you're actually getting.
For sure. The source even mentions confusion about whether the test is the same for men and women, talking about women using a sit funnel for the same test. It just points to a fundamental failure in making sure patients understand what's happening to them.
But the peak of this medical frustration, according to the source, was a specific test experience, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, the stress test anecdote. It's described as, and I quote, the worst thing I could ever imagine happening.
Not because the test itself was hard, but
because of how unprofessional it felt. The description is vivid. Apparently, the blood pressure cuff was put on so tightly even before it started inflating that it felt like it was cutting off circulation. Their hand went numb.
oh my god, that sounds awful. Potentially even dangerous.
Absolutely. And that kind of experience, that perceived negligence, it just shatters trust. The source explicitly says they told their cardiologist they would never go back to that facility.
I wouldn't blame them.
And when simple procedures feel unsafe or badly handled, it just makes the whole process of getting specialist care even harder. You're already chasing referrals, maybe having to travel long distances. Toronto is mentioned as a potential hub, and then appointments get booked miles away or canceled last minute. It's exhausting.
And on top of all these logistical nightmares, there's navigating the actual support programs themselves.
Right. Trying to understand the rules for things like the Ontario Drug Benefit Plan, the ODBP.
What's the detail there?
The source notes this critical income threshold, $25,000 a year for seniors, 65 plus to avoid paying the $100 deductible on prescriptions.
Okay.
What's interesting is the person says they don't make anywhere near that $25,000, so they're automatically exempt from the deductible.
Which shows, yeah, you have to understand these dense rules, right?
Yeah.
They're meant to help, but only if you can figure them out.
Exactly. You need to navigate the bureaucracy to get the benefit. And that complexity leads to the mention of ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program.
Right.
The system is apparently so complicated, so layered, that the source mentions people needing to add a representative, like a caregiver, just to handle the communications.
So you need help just to get help.
That's what it sounds like. For many, the system is just too much to handle alone. Getting assistance becomes another full-time job managing paperwork and calls.
Wow. Okay, so this first section paints a picture of, well, just constant struggle, doesn't it? A life where basic things, staying solvent, having a place to live, getting medical care, require this immense draining effort just to fight against errors in confusing systems.
Yeah, a constant battle against administrative friction and systemic opacity. It's quite a burden.
Okay, so if government and health systems are these opaque mazes, then technology, I guess, is the modern consumer maze. It promises connection and simplicity, but often delivers, well, something else.
That's a great way to put it. And the source material gives us a perfect example. The whole cell phone dilemma.
Right. There's this pull towards simplicity, isn't there? Kind of nostalgia.
Definitely. A real desire for a basic old school flip phone. Specifically mentioning models from like 2000 or 2001, just something that works as a phone.
But you can't really escape the demands of modern tech, can you?
Yeah.
5G, smartphones, apps.
Exactly. And
I know that was bullshit. No, I'm about your channel being terminated. Like, I've been on YouTube, like, this channel here before my 15th birthday, so I've been on here for over a decade. So,
And here's the fascinating contradiction. Even while longing for that flip phone simplicity, the aspirations for what a smartphone should do are huge.
Like what?
Like wanting the phone to be the ultimate universal remote for life, using it as a car key, a house key, a garage door opener.
Okay, that makes some sense. Integrating things.
But then it goes further, aspiring for apps that could, and this is a quote, cook my dinner and do my laundry.
Wait, seriously, cook dinner and do laundry with the phone while wanting a 2001 flip phone.
Yeah. It's this incredible gap, isn't it? It speaks volumes about the power of the tech promise. You see the ads, the potential for ultimate convenience.
But the reality of using the current tech is often just frustrating.
Massively frustrating, and nowhere is that clearer than with the whole verification loop issue described in the source.
Ah, the dreaded two-step verification nightmare.
Nightmare is the word. Just sheer banging your head against the wall frustration. Password recovery, two-step codes, constantly being sent to an old phone number. A lost phone number. A number you can't access.
So you're locked out.
Completely locked out. And it forces this endless cycle of calling tech support. Rogers is mentioned. Geek Squad is mentioned.
And what happens when they call?
They get told, oh yes, this is very important. We'll fix it. It'll be sorted in a week. Promises, promises.
But the fix doesn't stick.
Never sticks. The problem just comes back. They get locked out again. The source talks about calling back multiple times only to find out nothing was actually done. It's presented not as user error, but as a fundamental failure in how account recovery is designed. It's broken.
And that tech frustration extends beyond phones, right? To setting up new gear.
Oh yeah. The experience of setting up a new computer, an Acer Aspire desktop is named. Sounds pretty overwhelming.
What were the issues there?
A lot of confusion about the basic components, the kind of stuff that's bewildering if you're not tech savvy. Like understanding the difference between 8 gigabytes of RAM and 16 gigabytes. Or what an SSD, a solid state drive, actually is compared to a regular hard drive.
Which are big differences in performance, but the terms are just jargon if you don't know.
Exactly. 16 gigs of RAM makes things run much smoother, and SSD makes boot up almost instant compared to the old spinning drives. But if you don't know that, how do you choose? It creates this vulnerability for the consumer.
And the physical setup, too.
Sounded like a real struggle. Screwing in monitors, dealing with all the cables, wrestling with unfamiliar terms like Pentium or HDMI. It's presented as this exhausting battle just to get the thing plugged in.
And then the software side had problems, too.
Yeah, even once it was physically set up, the promise of a smooth, new computer experience fell apart. Apparently, the wrong antivirus software got installed. Bitdefender was mentioned specifically.
Okay, that's annoying.
But maybe even more frustrating was this persistent Wi-Fi issue. The computer kept dropping the connection and needing to be manually reconnected every single time it rebooted.
On a desktop. That should just stay connected, right?
You'd think. Especially a new machine. The source expresses real disbelief that it couldn't even maintain that basic connection without constant manual intervention. It just shows how often new and improved fails on the fundamentals.
So the digital world is full of friction? What about just everyday stuff? Retail, services?
Similar story, really. Lots of small observational complaints that add up to a feeling of declining quality or service.
Like what kind of things?
Things like noticing chocolate peanut butter cups seem smaller than they used to be, breadsticks being dry, fast food fries, Wendy's and McDonald's are named having terrible flavor consistency. Just little everyday letdowns.
But these small complaints sometimes connect to bigger systemic issues, right? You mentioned public infrastructure.
Yes, and this is a really sharp connection the source makes. There's a major complaint leveled against the Toronto Transit Commission, the TTC.
What's the issue there?
Frequent service shutdowns. specifically mentioning stations like Yorkdale being bypassed. And crucially, this is blamed directly on years of deferred maintenance.
Ah, so connecting the dots.
Exactly. The source explicitly says the TTC, like other public services, went without proper upkeep for years. So your personal inconvenience missing your stop, being delayed, isn't just bad luck. It's a direct, tangible result of failures in governance and public investment. The neglect becomes part of your daily commute.
That's a powerful link. And there was one more quirky retail thing. The sporks.
Oh, right. The wooden sporks at McDonald's. This is presented as a perfect example of, like, well-intentioned changes creating new problems.
How so?
These wooden hybrid spoon fork things are described as just gross to use, but also a waste.
A waste. More than plastic.
Well, the argument seems to be that the wood often isn't easily recycled or composted in existing systems. So ironically, it might end up being worse for waste management than the plastic it replaced. It feels like corporate greenwashing that just creates a worse experience and maybe doesn't even help the environment.
So across the board, this section paints a picture of systems, tech, infrastructure, retail, just creating constant friction. Poor design, neglect, failing to deliver on basic promises.
Yeah, another layer of cognitive drain, just trying to navigate it all.
Okay, it sort of makes sense then that if you're constantly battling these frustrations in daily life, confusing bills, transit that doesn't work, tech that fights you eventually, that frustration is going to spill over into how you see the bigger picture, right? The systems that govern us.
Absolutely. And this next section is where we really see those unfiltered political opinions come out. It's strong stuff.
Yeah, the source doesn't hold back.
Not at all. And what's really interesting is you get these very forceful, sometimes even conflicting views on leaders in both Canada and the US. It seems to be a critique aimed at what's perceived as arrogance and just misplaced priorities on both sides of the border.
So starting with the Canadian perspective.
The criticism of Prime Minister Trudeau is pretty harsh, quite sweeping. He's accused of running a crap military.
Okay.
And the source even seems to blame him for current border issues, talking about a fence or wall separating Canada and the US, implying his actions are the cause.
That's a strong claim.
It is, but perhaps the most revealing comment is the belief that Trudeau thinks he's God. That really centers the critique on perceived hubris, more than specific policy maybe.
And what about the view on the US side regarding former President Trump?
It's similarly severe, just focused differently. Trump is associated with causing enough bullshit, as the source puts it, to create travel problems for Americans internationally.
Okay, so international image issues.
Yeah, and there's a pointed financial criticism, too. The argument made is that Trump spends all the Americans' money instead of his own. It implies a misuse of public funds, or at least a perception that his actions lead to unnecessary public expense.
So harsh words are both. What's the takeaway from comparing those two critiques?
Well, what's really insightful is how the source kind of equates them despite their differences. They're both seen as fundamentally seeking power, described almost like they're vying to be the king of North America.
Suggesting the problem isn't just about left versus right, but maybe about personality, arrogance, and leadership.
That seems to be the underlying feeling, yeah. That the core failure perceived isn't about specific political parties, but about the character and attitude of the individuals at the top.
And this general political frustration then narrows down to specific policies, right?
Yeah.
Like the carbon tax in Canada.
Exactly. That political critique flows right into a very targeted complaint about the carbon tax. The source expresses just complete confusion and annoyance about how it works in practice.
Especially the rebate part.
Especially the rebate. There's this explicit question. Why would I get a carbon tax rebate? I don't drive.
Okay, I can see the confusion there.
The person clearly recognizes they are paying the tax indirectly through higher costs for fossil fuels, heating oil, gas, and crucially, groceries because of shipping costs. They even argue they pay it just by breathing in the carbon monoxide cars make.
So they feel the cost burden everywhere.
Right. They feel taxed on carbon through all these rising costs, but the rebate feels like this weird token gesture that doesn't actually make things affordable again.
So the policy feels like it takes with one hand and gives a tiny bit back with the other without fixing the core problem.
That's precisely the sentiment. It breeds this deep mistrust of the economic mechanism. It feels like a shell game, not a solution to the rising cost of living.
And finally, in this section, there was something about government revenue and accountability.
Yes, and it centers on marijuana legalization. The source makes this very specific and pretty provocative claim.
What's the claim?
That the government made a massive profit, $5 billion, is the figure used just in the first 6 months after marijuana was legalized.
$5 billion in 6 months.
Yeah.
That sounds huge.
It does. Now, whether that exact number is accurate or maybe an exaggeration based on perception, the real point is the question that immediately follows it.
That's just.
Where did that $5 billion go? Did you get any of it?
Okay. So it's about transparency and benefit.
Exactly. It taps right into that common public frustration. When governments generate these huge windfalls, where does the money actually go? The public often feels like they don't see any tangible benefit. There's no clear accounting.
And that ties back to the earlier theme of needing to audit everything yourself.
Right.
Mistrust of opaque systems.
Perfectly. If you can't trust the math on your rent receipt, why would you trust the government's accounting for billions in cannabis revenue? It all feeds the same cycle of skepticism.
So, when you're feeling overwhelmed by all this, the bureaucratic battles, the confusing tech, the politics, where do you find an escape? The source material shows us, right? Deep dives into leisure.
Yeah, and it's not just passive watching, it's highly engaged. You see real technical knowledge, intense emotional investment, whether it's in scripted entertainment or actual sports.
Let's start with wrestling. WWE, WWF gets mentioned a lot.
Oh, absolutely. It's clearly a major interest. And again, this isn't just casual viewing. The source demonstrates a pretty deep understanding of the backstage stuff, the money side of it, and crucially, the real physical risks involved in the moves, even though it's choreographed.
There was a specific move analysis, wasn't there? The tombstone pile driver.
Yes, the Undertaker's signature move. And the source goes into detail about how incredibly dangerous it is if not done perfectly. The emphasis is on needing to be precise exact.
Why is it so dangerous?
Well, the move involves dropping your opponent basically head first towards the mat. The source understands that the person doing the move has to protect the other wrestler by ensuring their knees hit the mat first, absorbing the impact before the head gets anywhere close. If that timing or placement is off...
You could break someone's neck.
Exactly. That's the stated risk. And the source even references a specific instance, mentioning a female wrestler who apparently botched the move and suffered serious consequences. It really highlights that thin, dangerous line between performance and real harm.
So real appreciation for the skill and the risk involved.
Definitely. And the interest goes beyond the ring into the financial politics of it all.
Like what?
There's talk about rivalries between the big stars, specifically mentioning the Ultimate Warrior wanting the same kind of money as Hulk Hogan.
But that wasn't going to happen.
Apparently not.
Hey,
The source's
Hulk,
explanation,
how are you, man?
Hogan had prestige. Which is a fascinating insight, right? It's a little microcosm of corporate hierarchy. Even in this world of spectacle, there's an understanding of established value versus maybe flash-in-the-pan stardom. Star power isn't the same as institutional weight.
And the person behind it all? Vince McMahon.
Judged as a genius, specifically for creating the structure that successfully blurred the lines between sport and entertainment, between reality and script, and built this massive, enduring business out of it.
Okay, so deep into wrestling. What about more conventional sports?
Yeah.
Hockey comes up.
Oh, yes. And if the wrestling interest is analytical, the hockey interest is pure, raw emotion. Specifically, the agony of being a Toronto Maple Leafs fan.
Time-honored tradition of suffering.
Apparently so. The disappointment, especially during playoff time, is just visceral. Losses like 6-1 are flatly called an embarrassment.
Does the frustration lead to armchair coaching?
Absolutely. There's direct criticism of game strategy, particularly the tactic of pulling the goalie when you're behind late in the game.
What's the argument against it?
It's very pointed. Why would you pull the goalie if you can't keep the puck out of your own end? It's the voice of a truly fed-up fan who thinks the strategy is just fundamentally flawed if your team's defense is already struggling. It relies on something the team doesn't have.
Makes sense. And the frustration extends beyond just the Leafs, right? To the league itself.
Yeah, there's a sense of fatigue with the sheer scale and length of modern pro sports. The source complains about the NHL season stretching into July now.
Which feels unnatural for a winter sport.
Exactly. And also questions the need for 32 teams in the league.
Why the critique of expansion?
It comes with this great line questioning whether teams in warm climates, specifically mentioning Florida, even know what the ice looks like in their own hometown.
Ah, okay.
It speaks to this feeling that maybe the commercial drive, the expansion, has kind of diluted the sport's identity, maybe overshadowed the regional roots and the traditional seasonal rhythm of the game.
Fair enough. So wrestling, hockey. What about just kicking back with some TV?
That's the final piece of the leisure puzzle. Finding comfort in routine
So
viewing.
my
The
son
source lists some
on
specific
Tom-
syndicated shows they watch regularly.
What are the go-tos?
It's a mix. You've got classics like MAH, then more contemporary stuff like The Librarians, the Canadian sitcom Corner Gas, Two and a Half Men, and the crime show Castle. A predictable rotation.
Just reliable comfort viewing.
Seems like it. But even this simple act has its own little quirks mentioned, like still relying on the actual TV guide channel to see what's on.
Wow, people still use that.
Apparently so. And also noting the strange thing where channels sometimes just display a sign-off screen for like 12 hours straight.
Like the old days of broadcast TV ending for the night.
Yeah, exactly. Which is kind of funny, isn't it? While we're talking about the frustrations of 5G and SSDs and verification loops, the user is still interacting with these much older, sometimes glitchy, legacy broadcast systems on a daily basis. It's all part of the media landscape they navigate.
Wow. Okay. That was quite a journey through the noise, wasn't it? We went from the nitty-gritty of a $55 discrepancy on a rent bill,
All the way to criticizing decades of deferred maintenance on the Toronto subway system,
and from analyzing the precise, dangerous mechanics of a tombstone pile driver.
to questioning where billions in government cannabis revenue actually ended up. It's quite the range.
So, pulling it all together, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive into such, well, unfiltered communication?
I think the core conclusion has to be about the sheer cognitive load, the immense, often unnecessary mental energy that modern life demands just to manage the basics.
Yeah.
Every system we interact with, financial, health, transit, technology, seems to introduce its own friction, its own errors, its own complexities. And it forces the individual to spend so much energy just keeping things from falling apart, just treading water.
So, for you, the learner, the thing to maybe recognize is that this feeling, this sense of constantly fighting upstream against systems that feel indifferent or broken, it's common. Whether you're chasing down a verification code sent to a phone you lost years ago, or dealing with a medical appointment that's 3 years overdue, or just watching public services seem to crumble. The common thread is this need for constant vigilance, constant auditing. The system demands you manage its failures.
And that brings us to the final sort of provocative thought that was actually raised in the source material itself.
Right. What was that again?
It was this observation, this belief that we know less about our world than we know about the moon.
Okay.
So given everything we've just discussed, all these pervasive frustrations with opaque tax systems, malfunctioning infrastructure, confusing bills, technology that doesn't quite work, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Wonder what?
Is our biggest struggle today really about understanding the physical world, the moon, the stars, nature? Or is it actually about understanding and maybe fixing the incredibly confusing, often inefficient, sometimes downright broken human-made systems and bureaucracies that we've built all around ourselves?
That feels depressingly accurate sometimes. It really does seem like the final frontier might just be figuring how to make our own stuff work properly.
Maybe so. Something to think about.
Definitely something to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Okay, that was the deep dive, so of every man's or every day man's evidence. So I'm going to go now, so if you like this, please like and subscribe for me. Peace.